In this video, I want to talk about the idea of what we call study validity. And this is a bit confusing. You'll often just see it termed validity, but I like to say study validity because we also have other forms in which we would be talking about validity, like measurement validity. So it all has to do with the same kind of stuff. We're always talking about, is something valid? And when we talked about this before, I think the definition we gave was something like, when something is valid, we mean that it is well supported. Well, you could say this in a number of different ways, but we said it's well supported by evidence and reason. Whatever it is, whatever claim you're making, whatever you're saying something does, is that claim well supported by evidence and reason? Or is there some flaw in your thinking, or some flaw in the data you have, or in the evidence that you're providing? So with measurement validity, we might be saying something like, this IQ test measures intelligence. If that really is the case, if the test really does measure intelligence, then our claim that it measures intelligence is well supported by evidence and reason, and it is valid. So we can give good evidence and reason to show, yes, indeed, it is measuring what we say it is measuring, and then we call that measurement validity. In this case, when we apply this just to an overall study, we might call something a valid study, or we might talk about the validity of a study. And what we would mean by that is very similar. We would basically be saying, and I'll try to keep this as simple as possible, the study does what you claim it does. That's a very broad definition, but basically we're saying, okay, things like, if your study is going to generate certain results, do those results mean what you think they mean? So first of all, did you use valid techniques to get those results? So do the numbers that you got, were they arrived at in a way that makes sense for what you're saying the numbers mean? And then, are the conclusions that you're drawing about that, are they also true? So you might get some results. You might want to use those results to draw some conclusions or claims. And basically we're saying, if those results were gotten in a valid way, if the results mean what you believe they mean, if they answer the question that you were asking with the study, right? If the study was about whether there is a connection between anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder, then did you get data that is appropriate for answering the question that you were asking? And does your answer to that question, is it valid? Is it well supported by the evidence that you have in your study? So let me give you a concrete example of a study that was not valid. We would say that the study lacked validity. Let's say that you are going to conduct a political poll, a political survey, to try to see who's going to win the upcoming election. We've talked about this kind of thing before. And let's say that you, to select the participants for your study, you pick up the phone book and you just go through the phone book and you start calling people in the phone book. And you do this, and they say that a particular candidate is going to win. And this was actually done back in 1936. This particular newspaper did a political poll, and they said this was a race between Franklin D. Roosevelt and a guy named Alfred Landon. And this newspaper, which had correctly predicted the election results for a number of years, they did this quite extensive study, selecting participants in a number of different ways. But one of the main ways they did that was by calling people out of the phone book. And they said the claim they made, based on their results, the claim they made was that this Alfred Landon guy would win. They said Landon will, oops, my pen is spazzing out there, will win. And what actually happened, the reality was that Franklin Delano Roosevelt won. So what happened was that their sampling methods were actually biased. For example, when you call people, if you just call people on the phone, especially at that time, you're going to get very different people than if you were to go around and really truly randomly select people from the population. In this case, the people who had phones at that time were, socioeconomically better off than people who didn't, and apparently that had some effect on how they voted. And they selected people in a number of other ways, but apparently overall, the sample that they collected was substantially biased, and they were really quite far off in the margin by which they thought. They thought Landon would win by a large margin, and FDR won instead by a large margin. So we would say that because of that flaw in their methods, it was not a valid study. The way they selected their participants introduced bias, which means that the results did not mean what they claimed that they meant. So the study didn't do what they claim it did. They claimed this study correctly, accurately, validly predicts who will be president. It didn't do that. So the study was not valid, or we could say that it lacked validity. Now, I don't want to give you an idea that it is possible to always avoid every problem that might come up in your study. No study is going to be perfect. There's always going to be questions about things that were shortcomings that you couldn't overcome that might possibly threaten the validity of the study. And we'll talk about different threats to validity and different types of study validity that you need to think about. But no matter how much you work at it, and it is important, very important to work at it as hard as you can, but you're never going to make it perfect, and it doesn't have to be perfect. What I would say is that the most important thing is that you not make a claim that isn't backed up by what you found. So you will see very often in the results and the discussion sections of scientific journal articles that the researchers are very reserved in how they make their statements, claims, conclusions about what the study did. And they'll say, this indicates, or this provides strong evidence for our claim, or this may be the case. Even when they have very good reasons to think it is, they will generally avoid phrases that indicate absolute certainty, and they'll try to be very honest about what the possible threats to validity were in their study. So the way that I would summarize that is just to say, do not overclaim. Overclaiming meaning that you're claiming too much. You're going beyond what the evidence and your reasons are able to back up. So you need to tone your claims down a little bit to make sure they're in line with what you actually found.